credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Vitruvian Man podcast, a podcast centered around self-mastery. I'm your host, Zach Schenken. Today, I'm joined by Will Coomer. Will is a young entrepreneur, digital nomad, and inquisitive spiritualist who thinks deeply about life, work, design, and the human experience. I'm excited for our conversation today that will cover anything from travel hacking to God and the universe. Will, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Zach. Appreciate it. Really, really glad we made this happen.
I know it's been a little bit of a back and forth, as we were kind of just talking about. We can get into the travel portion of like your lifestyle and why you find it so important, because I think it's very fascinating, and I think it's a temperamental difference that's something that's actually dissimilar about us. But like, I love the group that you have and the lifestyle of digital nomadism. It's like a weird byproduct of this information age that we live in and the post-COVID world of like using your brain to make money from kind of anywhere as long as you have an internet connection. I think it's really unique. And so over the past few weeks, you've been kind of gallivanting across Southeast Asia. And so it's been tough with time zones and everything, but I'm glad that now that you're back stateside, we can make this thing kind of happen.
Yeah, most definitely. And we'll definitely dive in there because there's a lot to talk about, but like just even what you discussed, like that time zone issue. But yeah, let's just dive in and we can hit some of those topics. I'm sure
I think it'll come up quickly. I typically like to intro because it gives me and anyone listening context to who they're listening to, as well as context to where they are now. Like, I'd love to hear a little bit about the TLDR of your origin story and your path to like what I describe as this world of like self-mastery, kind of the levels of awareness, consciousness, self-actualization. There's a lot of terms for it, but at some point you were just a child, close to God, very open-eyed like all of us, and then layers come on, you start doing the life thing. But like, I'm curious to hear if there was a transformational person, event, something that pushed you to the self-development world, and what was that kind of look like?
Yeah, so for here, I definitely have like a timeline breakdown where it's like, okay, I know this is when I got into this and that. So I'll start really, I mean, talking about like more of the child stage. I'm very blessed and fortunate to have a family that, like, specifically my mom, I remember as I was just a really young child always telling me like, Will, you're meant to do great things. You're going to do like just, kind of repeated things of that, like you're going to do big things, you're meant to do great things. And just that repeated kind of phrase and sentiment programmed into me. So that's definitely a positive start of just like realizing, okay, I don't know what it maybe is, especially as a child, but I know I'm really required, not by my family or thing, but like just personally required to actually do great things and have it in me for sure. But really, as far as moving much more into what you described as like the self-mastery, that for me started around seventh grade, so like 13 or 14 with basketball. And actually basketball is how I first started meditating and first really started getting into like personal development. Because my greatest problem with not just basketball, but sports and many activities was I thought too much. So whether it was ADHD, ADD, just anything, hyperactive brain, whatever you want to say, you can't play a sport, and specifically basketball, if you're thinking all the time. It gets in the way. So I learned from Kobe Bryant, and Kobe's still one of my favorites, that he meditated for different reasons. And through meditation, actually using meditation like medication, is how I could learn how to focus. And so I started with just like 3 minutes after every workout, once a day otherwise, in seventh grade, meditating, and actually learned how to focus that way. And that was kind of the dive in point into other forms of like personal development. So it was because also, just prefacing or explaining about basketball, I was shit, like really, really bad. The first year I played, it was hard for me to run up and down the court without falling, like actually, like much less dribble a ball. So that should be a fairly good perspective, but knew it was something I wanted to be good at and found really the first thing for me to dive into. So through that, through the pursuit of greatness, whatever LeBron says, like strive for greatness, there is what helped me develop so many of these other skills, and really like thought patterns, that allow me to succeed today. So specifically there with basketball, it was probably biggest benefit is focus and meditation, but also from a sports perspective, you analyze your game, how you're playing, et cetera. So that really, because I was the only one beyond like coaches telling me stuff, but for someone who thinks a lot, coaches, I think, never give you the amount of feedback you're really looking for, or at least for me. So I was analyzing everything I did, which really boosted my self-awareness. And through that, essentially, it was like, okay, like figuring out the way I move, or what does this workout produce, or what do I need to implement into my game that is going to help me succeed even more. So getting through that process, fast forward, I fairly quickly actually learned how to run up and down a basketball court and dribble and shoot and things like that. Did well, got to the point where I was going to play in college, but really the development there, I decided not to play. And that was because everything I wanted to do, I wanted to become successful at basketball, and to play in college, not to, like many, go into the NBA even, but I wanted to play overseas, and, what is known as the Euro League, because I wanted to travel. I wanted to be a global person, right? And realized through just general analysis, that I could do those things much quicker through other avenues, example, business, or study, than basketball. Because no matter what, with basketball, okay, generally I'm probably going to play 4 years because I was going to get my degree too, and then go overseas. And unless you're a huge standout, here, or a dropout from the NBA or something, you generally have to work your way up from the bottom league to some of the top leagues. And alongside the basketball academics, really like all I cared about in high school and even previously was academics and basketball. So that's all I did. The academic side, admittedly, like came pretty easy to me. So, always knew I was intelligent, smart, etc. And realized with that, just using my intelligence in other ways and applying it to, like I said, business, could speed up the process rather than that, like whatever it might take, 6 years or so. And so I went to school. I was an international business major in college. Basically, of course, had a bunch of learning opportunities there, networked. And once after that senior year of high school, stopped playing basketball. I'm not sure if you played a sport or not, but many athletes who stop playing, right? It sounds like, you've probably gone through this, especially if you play really seriously. Like there was a huge gap in your life just in time. Not even to mention, the mental side, or like what you're consumed with, etc. And so for like a semester in college, I just felt absolutely lost. But then, realized, okay, like let's apply this even more focused in a sense. Let's apply all this energy and time, at learning, what you call self-mastery, like going into personal development there. And so just took an absolute deep dive there. And this is something I actually thought about, discussing today beforehand, kind of hope we get into it, is, had moments where pretty soon into college, I did have some like good classes that were helpful, but especially even in the business realm, I realized quickly that I could teach myself and learn effectively more and learn more efficiently by studying, by reading books, by studying YouTube, and learning from other people online or meeting, etc. Right. So what I would do, especially in my off time in college, was teach myself courses, like my own prescribed and program courses. So started off with things like communication and leadership, and public speaking, and then getting even into areas of like social media marketing, right? And so essentially targeted what I knew were either abilities or areas, whatever you want to say, that would provide a great ROI for my life. And I knew it was important for someone who, kind of going back to that childhood thing, wanted to do great things, even though I might not know what those great things were, beyond traveling and being a global individual, right? And so had those areas. And this is flashing forward to what was my sophomore year of college, right before COVID hit, March 2020. I was studying social media marketing from guys like Gary Vee, Iman Gaji, who Gary Vee is huge in all like entrepreneur spaces now. And actually started because Gary Vee said so, pushing my own brand on LinkedIn. Lo and behold, March 2020, COVID hits, everything shuts down. And because for a couple months I had been pushing my brand and honestly grown to a fairly decent point where I was networking with people all over the country and posting content and have built my brand to like a decent point. This is like 3 years ago. So today it's almost laughable, but still was great for me at that time. I had entrepreneurs, local businesses, up to like even medium-sized businesses reach out and say, hey, we have no idea how to do any of this social media stuff. And basically just started working with clients out of that. Worked with entrepreneurs building their own personal brands, did lead gen for local businesses, and essentially like brand build outs. So as a college student, I was doing that, generally like 2K a month, which was pretty good. I just used it to travel on the weekends with my friends and things like that. Like I went to school in North Carolina and would go to like Charleston, South Carolina, or Florida, or Miami, or Vegas, right? And doing stuff like that. And that was awesome. But during that whole time at college, up until my final semester, I was, because my father had kind of programmed me to, I was really going with the intention of going into investment banking and eventually hedge fund management within finance. So all these social media marketing stuff, and Iman was the only guy I knew close to my age doing it, was just like, okay, this is fun money. Let's, just grow the savings, et cetera, use it to travel. And so through that process, just kept going there. But then Iman, who I respected, and because I actually ended up buying his course, because it got to the point where I had businesses be like, hey, do you want to be I want you to come on as my VP marketing. And I'm some, 21-year-old kid who's like, whoa, like I know I can do lead gen or build out your brand or whatever, but I don't know all this other stuff about marketing, right? And so recognize Iman as a really good source to learn from, bought his course, and was so impressed by that. Like from that point on, like really respected what he had to say. So he was, had been doing this, started way earlier than I had. And Iman shouted out this guy, Arlen Moore. And actually, this is, now we're flash forward to like my second to last semester, like November, December of 2021. And I actually stopped working with all my social media marketing clients because I said, okay, I'm going to grad school. I'm going to go into finance. Sorry, I got to cut this off, which was kind of silly, but I guess part of the process. And Iman Gaji shouts out this guy, Arlen Moore. And because I was still doing my own coursework and studying, at the time, it was the subconscious mind and essentially like mental programming. this guy Arlen starts talking about a program, a tool and program called Maxi that he had created to program the subconscious and conscious mind. So I was like, okay, this is right up my alley, what I'm studying right now. Let's try it out. And I was so impressed by Maxi and how well it had worked with everything that I had studied and come to learn about the brain, that when Arlen started talking about this other thing called Tribe, I was really interested because Maxi was such a good product. And even though I had worked in social media marketing, I still thought of social media for myself and for the personal use more of vanity metrics, or really only valuable for like business to business or business to consumer type things. But it was clear from learning more about Arlen that he had used social media to level up really at every standpoint of his life. So when he started talking about Tribe and this thing that could teach you, you could learn through Tribe how to optimize your social media to design your life, really, I was like, okay, this is right up my alley. And so I joined Tribe when it first started, which was January 2022, with like 74 other guys. And that was where really this whole online business world opened up to me. The only other thing that had essentially taught me about online business was reading The 4 Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss, which is, as you know, huge in our world. But it wasn't until that point when I joined where I actually met other guys my age or even younger who were, traveling and having successful businesses online. And like I said, the only thing really previous that I knew about was social media marketing. But I'm meeting through that group guys who I was like 23 at that time, guys who were the same age, literally doing like 7 figures with their businesses. And it's not like, previously, I think a lot of people think online business, or especially because of things like drop shipping or, day trading, right? Where there's a hard learning curve, or there's gurus who are scamming and stuff like out there. Like, no, there was a ton of legitimate businesses that were honest, good work, just based online. And it was like, shit, what do I want to do? I want to travel. I want to be able to, always visit my family. I want to have location freedom. I want to have time freedom. What's the avenue that can do that? Online business. Am I going to go into finance where, yes, I'll be very successful after whatever, like 4 to 6 years is the normal trajectory. Not that I guess think normally, but why should I do that when I can use my time way more effectively and already have plenty of other examples from my friends and have location and time freedom? And really that was the dive in point there. So basically said, fuck, and I'm good to swear, yeah? Is it cool to swear?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, just making sure. Yeah. Just wanted to make sure you can edit that out. But basically said, fuck all my, I stopped looking at any grad school or internships in finance and everything. Really stopped going to class my final semester, and I had kept up, grades really weren't a problem still. So skipped, I think the funniest one was I literally skipped 8 or 9 weeks of statistics, still got an A in the class, but put everything into investing and learning about all of these other online businesses, meeting as many people as I could, meeting up with other people in North Carolina, and just dove in. And I told my friends at the time, because they're like, Will, what's going on? What are you doing? Dove into transforming myself and learning as much as I could. So what I told my friends was I could set up a launch pad post-graduation to do exactly what I wanted there. And just one other point that I kind of want to address too, that I think, maybe we can dive into later, is another significant moment as to why online business was so great for me and why specifically location freedom was important, is because up until I learned about online business, I thought I was going to have to live in this small town, Ohio, for the rest of my life, because during the year 2020, both of my grandmothers died from COVID. And my whole family got it. Like I had COVID weeks previously. Wasn't that bad for me, but because of whatever comorbidities, et cetera, both of my grandmothers were, above the age of 70, so fairly old in that regard. But and I have a small family, so like my whole family would have been like 10 people at that time got it, and I was the only one taking care of them, and literally had to like drive both of my parents to the hospital. My dad's like calling his business partner saying this is where the will is, like pretty serious from that regard. And of course, didn't know a lot of what we know now about it. And then ended up losing both of my grandmothers. And, I have my dad being like, Will, I'm an orphan. My mom really can't keep her shit together. Her mom just died, right? And I'm pretty much the strong block through all of that. And, through that process, which I was, of course, happy to do and knew these are the things going to be called of me and required of me. But from that point on, one of the things actually, I took care of the second grandmother to die. I was taking care of her pretty much every day in her home. She was very sickly, and I knew she wasn't looking good, but my family still made me go back to college, and she died like probably 3 or 4 days later. And that was one of the biggest, like, I don't know, just like twist my heart points, I guess I'll call it. Because I couldn't be with him. So I said, never again am I going to let somebody control whether I can be with my family or not, even if it is my own family. And so that was why this All My Business thing was such, for me, a world opener, because now I realized I could do what I always wanted to do and travel and live wherever, but come back to wherever my family is at a moment's notice. So that's kind of how I got into here. Do you want me to keep going into like where I am now? I ended there of like a year and a half ago, but whatever you feel. I know
that was extremely comprehensive. I appreciate both the depth and candidness. There's a lot to touch on, so it'll be interesting to see how I parse through it. But I kind of would be remiss if I didn't immediately address kind of the gravity of losing your grandparents and then having to step into that like man of the family leader role, at least in concept, right? Like staring down the barrel of potentially like being the guy. Matthew McConaughey talks about you don't truly become a man until your father dies, because you're the patriarch of the bloodline. There's something kind of like a spiritual aspect there. Recently, somebody I look up to, Aubrey Marcus, also lost his dad. He's talked about kind of the ritualistic nature of becoming that man. And like, you think you're a man, you can even have your own kids, but like that moment, and I've witnessed it kind of like heavily shake my dad, losing his dad. And so forward casting to what that could potentially do to me, I'm curious, as somebody basically identical in age, what was that experience like, and how has that meditation on death shifted how you live your life outside of just the business?
Yeah, so I'll start with essentially like my process there of like dealing with everything, because a lot of the developments of what you're talking about, like I feel really strongly about and have had major realizations and just kind of like repatternings in myself because of that. Because yes, actually, I'll just start from that point. So like I said, and they actually died like within like, I don't know, a week or two of one another. So my mother's mom died Christmas Eve 2020, and my father's mom died first week of January. And so through that whole process, like I said, I was basically the strong point there, because it's like, okay, my grandfather, who's still the patriarch, my grandfather lost his wife of 50 years. My dad, who had already lost his father before, lost his only other parent. My mom, who had an incredible connection and a very deeply emotional and motherly figure, lost her strongest motherly figure, right? And then anyone else in the family is okay. Like my mother's sister, they're dealing with much the same thing. I'm the oldest of my brother and cousins. There's 4 of us total. But my brother's now, he's like 3 years. 2 of my cousins are 3. My brother and my other cousin are 3 years younger than me. And the other one's like 18 now. So was even younger at that time. So I'm definitely really looking into it as like, okay, I'm the person to make sure everybody is okay and hold the weight, hold the line here, where any gaps need to be filled. So through the funeral, was there in my family, like I would say really handled that well, from a like being there and dealing with it. Like my family has so much joy, and thankfully because of our beliefs and knowledge in God, specifically my mother's side of the family, like we're like smiling and laughing, and yes, of course crying, but smiling and laughing for like what was literally like a 6-hour viewing and service and whatnot, because you know, thankfully we were blessed to, or my grandparents were blessed to touch a lot of people's lives, and we've touched a lot of people's lives, I guess, there. And then dealing with the other grandma and having like, there were some specific moments where both actually, to note for me, both of my grandmothers, I know while they were living as well, were 2 of my biggest, how shall I say, spiritual advocates. Where, for example, my mom's mom was like, what, like Christian, I don't even know how to call it, like doctrine, or like eat, pray, love type, like live, laugh, love is what I meant to say. Christians would be like, she was like my prayer warrior, but like actually very powerful on a spiritual standpoint. And I knew that about her. Like almost not quite Mother Teresa, but like literally she had a long ass list of people that she prayed for and was like taken care of and stuff. So that was like losing that, I knew. And then my other grandmother was, and you know, maybe we can talk about this a little bit later, was more on the like spiritual side. Like she raised us with like a lot of like Native American ideologies or thoughts about nature and things like that. And literally my friends called her like Disney grandma, because she was kind of behaved and had like that Disney atmosphere to her. And literally when I had to say goodbye, and at this point, like taking care of her, she was pretty much semi-conscious, didn't really know where she was, stuff like that of what you would expect, you know, for like a dementia or like Alzheimer's person, but just was sick and so out of it. But literally as I was telling her goodbye, like locked back onto me and conscious. And essentially, I have the exact message like written down and everything, but certainly the feeling and understanding that she conveyed was burned in my mind, like locked on, like grabs my hands and is like, Will, you are the best thing in my world. I love you so much. I know you're doing incredible things and you're doing what you're supposed to. And like says it like this, so frank and serious, and obviously conveying love too. Keep doing you. I love you. I'll see you do well with college. Basically that sentiment, right? And floored me, and my aunt was the only one who kind of witnessed it, right? And obviously brought tears to both of our eyes. Had to say goodbye there. And like I said, my grandmother died a couple of days later. I came back home from college to spend some time with my family, and then actually went back to college. And for that period of time, for pretty much that whole rest of the semester, that was when, I don't even know if dealing with it was the proper word, because I didn't handle it right. Didn't know how to handle it. And it's on no one but me. But of course, my friends were like, they were great and I love them. But I don't know if you've ever gone through this, or there's so many people who have gone through this, but it's like I didn't really even want to be around them because I knew it wasn't normal. Like we're talking like I would I'm skipping a lot of class, obviously, but waking up and I would like sit down and cry in the shower like every morning, right? And all kinds of stuff like that. And basically like did all this stuff. Thankfully I still like at that point, and there's a whole nother, I guess, can of worms I could open through COVID and through all that process of taking care of my family. I actually, over the whole COVID process, I went from like 185 to 245. And then December 2020, actually same month my grandmother's died, decided this shit's not happening. So I did have that like one good element in my life where I was like turning my physical situation around a bit and working out. And that was a huge, definitely a huge anchor, but wasn't really dealing with or didn't know how to deal with stuff. So was dealing with all of that. And essentially where it got even worse was when I think I might have came home for spring break and basically was like, Will, this isn't you. Fuck all that. Like, these are things like you can't be letting this get you down. And definitely what hadn't really dealt with anything or gone through everything I needed to, and said, okay, we're coming back to campus. We're going hard, you know, like party. And right, I was, my whole life had been pretty much like, okay, high energy, high motor person, like loves to dance, etc. Not even like party frat bro type stuff, but just, you know, have a good time and be a chauffeur of good times, you could say. And so had that moment over spring break where it was like, oh, fuck that. Like, we're coming back and we're gonna live how we live, which was horrible. Because I started drinking again. And from that standpoint, like literally, and really not even cognizant of it when it was happening, but like every time I drank, I was blacking out, which I had never done ever intentionally. And it still wasn't even intentionally, but never had previously happened. And like literally wasn't even like, I was like a shell of a person really. And bottom line, a very weak man. And so basically just had the whole down spiral there, kept just fucking up in different ways, classes, life, friends, etc. And got to literally like lowest point and came home for the summer and was literally at the point like, and this is where I haven't even thought or talked about this in a while, but like the whole depression thing, like I don't really know what else to call it, because at that point in my life, I was like deeply depressed, like staying in bed all day. Knew I wanted to get out and was trying to get out, but just had no energy whatsoever. And even got to the point where like I had a gun loaded, like a loaded gun, and put, I say, like 3 rounds in the ground. So like I was going to kill myself and shot instead into the ground. And essentially used the personal development stuff to help me and like pull me out. And like specifically there was a couple good guys, like I saved clips, and like that was when I really unknowingly at the time started heavily programming myself to, like, I programmed myself to get out of that deep hole, right? Like literally that hole almost, I guess, to the grave. And what I did was I would watch it was a Joe Rogan video, a Kevin Hart video that was from Joe Rogan, and a like one other clip that was like a prayer. And so the Joe Rogan video, it's, I'm sure you've probably seen it. So many people have seen it. It's where it's like, you know, your life is your own movie. No matter whether good stuff or bad has happened, you decide exactly what it's supposed to be. It doesn't matter if you fucked up. You keep forward, leave that there, and keep forward and create your new scenes. Like make it the movie that you want to watch. So if you're in a bad part right now, why does that matter? Or throw that away and actively decide and do that. And I would just watch that on repeat. The other one was it's a Kevin Hart clip. It's like a pretty like somber, serious clip, but he's like I don't know if I remember the whole thing. And of course, like I could share them with you too, because I still have them on my phone. But it was, it's the sun going to shine, essentially, is what he says. Where it's the sun, like no matter what you do, what you go through, what happens to you, that sun is going to be there in the morning. Sun going to shine, right? And essentially, program and Jordan Peterson helped me deal a lot too with like the loss and family and whatever fuck ups from the spiral as well. But like those three specific things, I just hammered into myself and getting habits and whatnot. And that would have all been, this is like 2021 basically. And so that fall semester 2021 was like my first step back into like a more positive reality. So there's that as far as like actually dealing with the whole loss. And my relationship there, like with like, I guess the loss and the grandmothers now, I like couldn't be better. Of course, like there are moments where like we had Mother's Day and, I saw my family like be sad about not having their mothers or their grandmothers. Right. But there's also beautiful moments where it's like, I know, and I think of things in terms of like, obviously like you have there's so many like common phrases like, oh, people watching over you in heaven, or like, I literally have the two ancestors that I knew and loved and still love deeply, like watching me and around me and looking out for me, right? So like I take it from that perspective and honor them and think about honoring them actively in so many different ways, right? But then to go back to what you were talking about of like dealing with the father and standing in as the patriarch, that was one of the things, especially as like I had to pull myself out really of that before I could dive into any more of like the other stuff. Like I had to pull myself out there before you can really do anything else. And so for anybody who's in that situation, like that's where I would put everything, is pull yourself out. What's the phrase? You can't pour from an empty cup, right? Like my cup was fucking drained. But anyways, quickly realized through both my parents, literally having to take them to the emergency room, and my grandfather, like having his wife die, like he's the only one left and he is the true patriarch in my family. And like, even with that, like, obviously I'm not shitting on any of the other men in my family. Like I love my father, I love my uncles. But with the values I've been raised as, my cousins and the people that we will continue, like we're all meant to do great things and on a great track. And that requires an even higher level of man than, maybe what my father is right now, where my own dad had a lot of traumatic childhood shit and stuff he had to deal with, etc. That affects him in different ways. And so it's just like stepping up to higher levels where I know, like, and I'll be like, this is one of in the last probably 6 to 8 months developments, is like, I love, and because I think in terms of like ancestors and my grandmothers and whatnot, like, and think about like what went into everything for me to get here. Like my mission, not even just as a patriarch, but as a member of the family, is to become the best in the bloodline. Right. So like that's in terms of what I think of now, is going above and beyond in those areas and preparing for that standpoint. And that's the way really I think about it, is I'm in that preparation. Like everything I do is preparing for mainly two things. It's for that, being that man, that's the highest of the bloodline, the patriarch, the creator and founder. Even like I study fathers of like great families and stuff like that. So like whether you're like team like, oh fuck the world elites or whatever, or not, like the Rothschild family, like he had 5 sons and sent his sons out to do great things, and they really did some freaking great things, right? Like those are things I study in that term. And then also it's like preparing for the equivalent wife, and like, so those are the two things I prepare for and like always kind of have on my mind and approach. Once again, I know that was a little long-winded or comprehensive, as you kindly put, but hopefully that addresses it there.
No, definitely. I think you're a man after my own heart in that sense. Like I feel like we share I'm starting to try to like develop a thesis on it, and I'm terming it like the cross of self-awareness. I think that's the best metaphor, where it is both your crown of thorns but also your salvation. And like it allows you, like if you have this kind of remarkable level of self-awareness where like we're stuck in our heads all the time, we think deeply about everything, and then we think about thinking, and then we think about how does that affect, right? So like it can sometimes border on the negative of like the neuroticism, but it allows you to access depths of thought patterns and yourself and the world around you that some people just simply won't even see in their entire life. And so we're kindred spirits, I think, in that sense. So I'm happy to let you go because I tend to ramble. I mean, it's pretty self-aggrandizing to have a podcast in the first place. So I appreciate your vulnerability, and I think it's super powerful. And similar to reading, I love having these conversations because in my life, I will live thousands of lives through the books that I read. And then, we are the same age. So by hearing your story, sharing it in this moment, and hopefully, moments in the future, it's like I get to learn from your experience without having to feel that pain, and hopefully just, continue to accrue all these lessons. And that's exactly what sharing it does as well. It's like anyone listening to this gets to apply whatever is relevant to them. A lot obviously to unpack there as well. I like the concept of like being the strongest in the bloodline, and it's kind of this like crazy synchronicity. Because I had this long conversation yesterday. I catch up with this friend. I'll shout him out, Ryan Ayala. He does a podcast as well. We're kind of connecting in this internet space, both in a similar kind of growth stage. So we do like, every week we'll call to catch up, see how we're doing, whatever. And he kind of prompted our conversation yesterday. He's like, why do you feel like you were called, quote unquote? And you alluded to this at the very beginning. And I wanted to kind of circle back. Like you feel like you're being called, like you were given all these things to do something great. And it was that early programming where your mom was saying like, you're going to do big things. And I told him, I was like, for all the faults of like my relationship with my parents, and things that I can point out, like I wish that my dad did differently or showed up for me in whatever X, Y, and Z way. I told him that he gave me a superpower, and it was that from a very early age, like he was saying, like you can do anything you want to do. And of course, even at that time, like we're a kid, so you can't really receive it on a conscious level. You're just like, yeah, like all parents say that, every kid's going to get told they're smart, they're special, they're going to do great things. But like the power of that programming, and then you start to learn about the subconscious mind, and like that is a superpower. It was imbued with me so early on that like when it comes to stepping out and taking risks, like putting yourself out there, entering the arena, as I like to say, it was never a question. There was never a doubt. And like, there was no fear. I got this weird text. I have this shared, kind of almost a shared birthday with a good friend that I grew up with. He's the 16th and I'm the 18th. So we text each other on the 17th as this like armistice day. So we don't have to do the back and forth. And so we were kind of like, congratulating each other on not dying. And he was saying like, at the end of his text, basically, it was like, you're braver than most. And it was a weird compliment. I've never received that. And I don't consider myself a brave person, but I can definitely see from the perspective of many, like stepping out into the world, like sharing your voice, putting yourself out there, it can be kind of this thing. But again, I don't see myself as brave because there's no fear because of that programming. Like that's why it was a superpower from the very beginning. And then to speak on kind of what you're talking about, like the calling, like, yeah, for whatever reason, we're given all of these attributes all at the same time. And it would be kind of like to spit in the face of God, our parents that sacrificed so much, their parents before them, to not enter the arena and try to do something good with it. And it's so awesome to hear your story and like feel your energy and character, because and this is the final point from me before I swing it back, is that like, and I'm sure you've probably already experienced it, but like you start to meet these people that you pedestalize because like, holy shit, they're doing really well in online business. They're doing this lifestyle that I want. And then you meet them and you unfortunately find out, like you alluded to, there's a lot of scammers out there, like low character dudes that just aren't the person that they portray online. It's pretty heartbreaking. And for me, it's less about fulfilling my dreams of like who I think they want I want them to be, and more about the longer vision of like, what are the role models that are out there? And if this is the character of those people and it continues to be reaffirmed, and like we live in a cancel culture, but like if there's always something to cancel people for, are there no heroes anymore? Like true heroes. And so it's important, and it's why like this platform matters to me. It's why I want to win in the long term. And I want people like you to like really get like obnoxiously large so that people can have somebody to look at and say like, you can win and also be somebody of high character. Like strive to be virtuous, strive to be morally bound, family man. Like it's the only thing that's going to save this like kind of grander spiritual war, if you will, like of the good and evil, the elites, all that stuff. And you know, I live in the self-mastery camp where like the world is a projection of the mind. So I think that like good and evil is a battle within, and then it's projected outward in what we receive from the world. But that's not to say that the things around us aren't happening. It's just that like it's going to take people like yourself. I'll put myself in the same camp again, a little self-aggrandizing, but like I don't know, it's very important. And it like clearly you can tell like it really fires me up, because to see another person doing it, right? Like if I stumble and fall and like disappear, the account gets blocked, whatever, like I get shot down, like there's other soldiers out there fucking doing it, you know, like it fires me up so much. And then what's also awesome is like I meditate on death all the time. It's why I kind of asked that. Like I have a Memento Mori penned here in my arm. It's like the outro of this podcast. And all of my decisions are kind of through that heuristic of like, if I were to die when I put my head down today, am I satisfied with not only how I live that day, but my life to that point? And now that I'm doing this, I can finally say yes, because like the feedback, even on the very small platform as it stands right now, like people have told me like, you know, I mean, you've probably seen it, like getting swipe ups on your story, DMs, like stuff like I didn't think about it this way. And now that I'm actually working with people, like it's the way I make money with my program, like I get to spend 12 weeks and then on with these guys, like giving them the tools that helped me, helping them change mindsets. Like if I were to get erased, I've already given the tools that like helped me to other people. Like it's so, I don't know. And that's why I want to get into your kind of work with congruence, talking about being purpose driven, because I think that there is very much shiny object syndrome with online entrepreneurship. And even some of the questions we got, which we'll get into the Q&A at the end. By the way, to the audience, I should have said that at the beginning as like a hook, but we're going to do the Q&A kind of at the end for those that asked. But a good amount of questions from people that follow you are interested in your lifestyle, which like willingly so. You have a great Instagram and like there's a lot of allure there. But I think that with people our age, it's a combination of a lot of things that come with like the pride of male youth, but like there's a temptation for a lot, like the watch, the car, the girls, whatever. But I think that like wealth is this like it's a false mountain. You think you're climbing the mountain and you get to a certain place and like you're in the Ferrari and you're still depressed. It's why like I preach on the gospel of like self-mastery, because like you have to do the work on you, because you can't run from yourself. Doesn't matter how much money you accumulate and all these things. So I think that's why like your work, like the money is like an energetic tool for you to use and like grow the platform. It's necessary to move in our world. It's not to say that we should be like non-attachment monks and like deny all material things, but I mean, you get it. Like I think that you see that higher calling, and I kind of want to touch on that. So I guess that'll be a jumping off point. Like with the work that you're doing, how do you see the kind of web of all the things that you're working on tying together? And then what is kind of your North Star vision for what you want to share with the world? Big question.
Yeah. So all good. And actually like, that's really where the name congruency comes from. So I guess to kind of cover that expanse of everything you just mentioned, is part of the name for being congruency is because I am now at the point in my life where everything is congruent. And part of the way I do things is I like to explain things in a multitude of ways, because one of the best phrases I ever heard was from a basketball coach, where I had gone to a camp and learned a bunch of stuff and just realized it was the same shit he was telling me the other time. And I came back home. I was like, Coach, I understand now. I'm sorry. I understand what you were saying. He goes, it's all right, Will. Same shit, different ass. And, you know, so I like to approach things from a bunch of different perspectives there. But there is a famous Japanese warrior philosopher, Miyamoto Musashi. I don't know if you're familiar or not, but one of his biggest concepts and key phrases that he says is there is nothing but the road. And putting that in another way, I've prayed to God for as long as I can remember that he would always keep me on his path for me. And so when I say the road, or when I say his path, or another thing I call it is the synchronous path in terms of like synchronicity, all of that, or like just living in congruency, means the same thing, where everything I do in my life is connected to my purpose in a deeper mission. So through that, like essentially there, the approach is, and when I say everything too, it's wild sometimes how, I mean, everything, like even watching a movie or something. But to get back to it there, it's like, okay, my best friends, we're doing business together. We're traveling together. They're the people I spend time with. It's not just like, okay, my friends are separate. My work is separate. Whatever else, A, B, X, Y, Z is separate. Excuse me. And that term, like to kind of break down this recent month, right? I was in Bali, and for business and the desire to travel and be global, and one of my most fulfilling things is showing others places I love and providing them good experiences. The first 2 weeks I was in Bali, I showed these friends who had never been this beautiful island, introduced them to people I had met there before, the beautiful Balinese people I love. You know, I worked out with them. We're covering almost all the bases there, and it's a congruent life, and it's some of the deepest, most like it is the deepest fulfillment I've ever received, in terms of having your life be congruent there. And essentially, then all my biggest focus is staying per Musashi, staying on this road. If you want to put it in a faith spiritual standpoint, it's doing more of what brings me close to God and doing less of what takes me away from him. So to dive into a little what that means about staying on the road, is okay, what do I need to do? I'll address first what keeps me from the road. So from a habit standpoint, it's something as simple as, okay, distraction. Like, we're not going to scroll social media because, once again, we're called to greatness. And we need to do things not just for ourselves, but for the others that we know we're going to impact. And want, like you addressed earlier, as really in a, like, I think of it too, like in a war, in a spiritual war way. Like, right, I know part of my mission as well with this is to, I say, like, not exactly like wake up sheep, but rather wake up the sleeping lions is what I like to say. So bring more warriors with us. And so I do that really through all of this and living. And I know I've strayed from the original question here. But with that, it's like, okay, I get fulfillment, referring back to congruency and back to the road. Everything in my life works with one another. The business, like I'm working with Arlen Moore and Tribe, with a group of more than 400 young entrepreneurs, online entrepreneurs, who are traveling around the world or want to, basically be doing that. And that's deeply fulfilling to me, just from just covering a fulfillment thing, because that tribe is one of the vehicles that really helped me to get to where I am today. So I care about helping others do the same if that is their, goal and desire. From a fitness perspective, basically, right? Like I'm working out with other people who are, how shall I say, extremely physically fit, not just to be fit because they know, but because they know one of their tenets is like they need to be. And like I recognize, like I still work out now, and I'm going to keep working out because I recognize that my body is not at the point where it's called to be. One of my personal mantras is a man should be a warrior, an artist, and a philosopher. And I think that's like Thucydides or maybe some military commander. But like, okay, I'm not the ultimate warrior right now, or whatever you want to say. It's congruent with that. And then my fun is, guess what? I'm traveling all around the world. I'm hanging out with people we enjoy. We're freaking riding dirt bikes on top of volcanoes. I'm paragliding over South American cities, right? Like things like that with these people that I'm working out with the people that I'm working with. Um, and it's like, it's fucking beautiful, man.
Yeah. I mean, so much alignment there. And it's funny. It sounds like I love, like, we, even before we hopped on the recording, like we were talking about, and you touched on it here too, like saying it in different words and kind of the like misnomer of like oversaturation, right? Like that, like entering this space. It sounds like we're doing extremely similar work. And it's just like amazing because I think the world is so tremendously abundant, and like what you're talking about, like waking up sleeping lions, like it's obviously going to sound extremely corny, but like I definitely see like my work as like saving souls. Like you're basically bringing people into total congruence, as you say, like alignment with their mission, their purpose, their master vision. Um, because there's no wrong time like in your life, you know, like I think it's like products like this are, it's awesome for me, like when I get to work with younger guys like in university or even before. But you know, I've also worked with guys that are in their like 30s and 40s where it's like they got down the road, like we alluded to before, of what they perceive to be the mountain, this financial success, business success, whatever. And you get there and it's like, why doesn't it feel full? And you and I have business aspirations. I certainly expect myself over a long enough time horizon to accumulate a ton of like material wealth, but as a consequence of the work. And for me, it's like I hear enough of these guys from like literally King Solomon all the way to modern day entrepreneurs that say
That's
like,
King Solomon is like, that's almost my number one who I study.
yeah, dude, it's amazing. Like so many one-liners too. Um, but yeah, like he said, like do not stack up silos with grain and expect yourself to be great. That is not where you're going to find your fulfillment. And even if you do, you spend all this time and then you get there and I don't know. What I always say to people is like there is no wrong time unless you just never do it. So it's like you get to 65 and you hear about kind of these like deathbed realizations, all these kind of things. So for me as like a young person, and I know you in a similar sense, like I choose to not be so arrogant to assume that I'm different and I'm not chasing the watch, the Lambo, the whatever, because I can just trust them and be like, yeah, well, everyone's saying that's not going to fill my cup. So like if it's not in alignment with me, and for me, like that's not part of my congruent mission statement. For some people, like maybe they just love cars and that is going to be something that fills their cup, but like that's not part of my answer. Mine is much more, you know, like train physically, spend time in the sun, live like a vital life, share it with other people doing the same, and then have this higher mission. And it comes with, you know, some of the material things, whether it be money or a platform or audience or whatever.
And I just realized how far I actually ventured away from the original question there. So I guess my bad for that one. But like you said earlier, I also have a bit of a tendency to ramble on or go in a bit of different directions. But yeah, no, you're exactly right. And that's where like for like the congruency, right? For myself, actually putting it to like say like Lamborghinis or whatever, like for me, I love speed. And so like I know that's something like, yeah, I'm going to have these vehicles that will go fucking fast, right? Just like that's where I can get just as much peace from jumping out of an airplane or going really fast as I can from some of my deepest meditations or whatever else, right? And I get that fulfillment there. But yeah, I'll let you kind of redirect the flow here.
No, you're good. I think
So,
that's something well said, and it's paired with kind of what we talked about with the cross of self-awareness. There was nothing wrong with any specific direction or lane. Like even if you want to choose something, what can a lot of people may bucket as mundane, but like if you are really, really aware of why you're going into accounting, law, um, building an SMMA agency, or whatever it may be that isn't like an artistic pursuit. It's not really romantic. Like I had Winston on last episode, and he was talking about, I mean, like I was telling him that, you know, this concept of being a writer is very romantic. I think that's why people are like magnetically drawn to him and his platform online, because it's like to be a writer in the modern age, like to somehow like rekindle the arts, like even for me it's like very romantic. I like to think of like yourself, it's like the philosopher, the king, the artist, all that stuff. For me I talk about the philosopher king, like the warrior poet, obviously being kind of that Eastern tradition. And so yeah, no, I think as long as you pair everything with the self-awareness, that is really, really everything. It's why, like, you know, the beginning of my program and the beginning of many of these like self-mastery things is you start with you, like set your baseline, but ask yourself introspective questions like, what do I want for myself? Like write it out in granularity. And then the next step, like for me and the men that I work with, is like, why do I want those things? Are those just mimetic desires that are like this reflection of, oh, like so and so said that like wealthy people drive Porsches, and so I want a Porsche. But like, do you want the Porsche? Do you just want to signal to other people that you're wealthy? Do you want to make 250K a year, or do you just want to be free with your time? Because I'm telling you, you don't need 250K to get there. Like it could be much less. I'm sure you're familiar with the story of the fisherman, where like the guy's fishing on the beach. The American, basically Western guy comes in, starts asking all these questions,
yeah,
like, could you do X, Y, and Z? Why? Eventually gets to the place where he's already living the dream, and he doesn't
exactly.
have to take this circuitous route to get there. Um,
Yeah. And that's so similar because like that, the way I guess, you know, the kind of different way, same thing is like, I say like one of the most important things for all of us is getting clarity and getting absolute clarity, right? Because just like you said, like pretty much, I mean, literally same thing where it's like once you get absolute clarity on who you are, who you want to be, who you want around you, and just really cover your bases there, then you can layer back everything as far as getting even deeper on the self-awareness portion of like you just said, do I want a Porsche because it's signaling? Is do I need like, and you know, these are I'm sure you probably deal with it as well, is like one of the things that's on my mind, you know, goes in and out, but basically it's like the whole thing for like a girlfriend, or and like I care deeply about family, obviously, and it's you have to have a girlfriend first to get a wife, right? But it's like, okay, I'm actively building and doing all of these things. Do I feel like I need a girlfriend right now because that's what my friends are getting married, or you know, that's what guys my age are expected to have? Or is it because I know, um, you know, whatever reason, that's something I deeply feel I'm ready for and I want? And right, you know, you can obviously address that from so many different angles and approach that to, and I recommend applying that to every single facet of your life of like, okay, is this something that's me, or is this programmed into me, or whatever you want to say? But
yeah,
yeah,
and I think that you touched on something really important, which is that it's not a set it and forget it with any of this stuff. It's a returning, it's like a self audit that is almost like kind of continual. And once you're curating both your intuition and your self awareness, it kind of runs in the background. I think like there are levels that are maybe naturally more predisposed, like yourself and myself. Like I've always been this like just
yeah,
weird, like deep thinking old soul. You know, they would say like, oh, he's mature
right,
for his age, right? Like I've gotten
right.
that kind of feedback since I was like very, very young.
Oh yeah, I always did better with adults growing up than honestly with kids. I understood adults more than I understood the children. At
Yeah.
least I thought, right? Like,
Yeah. Same. No. I got all that same feedback. And like I've always bought the byproduct of that is that like most people my age at all of the ages up until now, including now, you know, just like there's not a tremendous amount of alignment. And so yeah, like the circles has stayed small. And pairing it with self-awareness, it becomes this kind of superpower as opposed to something that you're like, why am I a black sheep? Why am I alone? And you like take value in that solitude. Yeah. So like constantly practicing that reflection of like, is this a mimetic desire or is this something that's deeply in tune with myself? And then the girlfriend thing, I do kind of want to touch on that because I also have that conversation with myself. And there's like a dual nature to it where I want to be as respectful as possible to the person that I bring into my life, like in a serious way, outside of like casual dating. And I also think about like we are blessed as men that like we are called to become something. Like so our value is accumulating over time, but there is no timeline that we have to kind of solve that problem. But like if we get involved with a girl at our age and then, we turn 25, 26, 27, like they are owed the respect that things need to get serious, especially if kids are in the equation soon, right? So for me, it's like if I'm going to start dating a girl my age seriously, within a number of years, like a handful of years, it needs to be very clear to her, to be fair to her, whether or not this is going to go the distance. And like when I look at my vision for, a lot of guys like it's memed like the building the empire thing, right? But like I have very big goals, big enough that they scare even myself. So I know that that's going to take time. Like it's on the order of 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And so I know that family can be done in parallel and there will be parts where that is true. But as far as the kind of a mobility that you're given when you're young and you're single and you can just always have that autonomy, I do go back and forth in my head and I wrestle with this battle where like, is it unfair of me to put myself out there? Because like, I don't know. I mean, you're a young, successful guy. Like you've probably recognized that the access is pretty much limited on your like effort, right? Like the door's open when you try. Just like,
yeah.
So for me, it's like, do I actually actively put myself out there, and is it unfair to them? And I don't know. There's not like really a right answer, but what I've tried to kind of circle back to is that always leaning on intuition and like that feeling, super underrated. Like you have to just know what feels right in that moment, because there isn't going to be an age where it's like, okay, green light, start dating. It'll just be like, it feels like I need to like have this life partner and like build that part of my life out.
Yeah. And we're so very similar on that aspect where like, you've probably already thought of it this way, but I've described it to multiple people. And actually Arlen and I were talking about this like a week or so ago. And one of my best friends, Henry Purchase, and I, he has a girlfriend. So like, I asked my friends who have girlfriends, especially if they've been dating for a long time, like all their perspectives. Cause my biggest, I don't even know if it's a debate, but like the biggest, or even a battle, like the biggest dynamic I have is, I'm trying to make this look good in the camera, is I have this side is like build, wife, family, go absolutely nuts, like producing whatever you want to say, high level, high value, etc. Right? Like just put some great metrics on it as far as family goes, and then conquer, build businesses on this side. And it's just like, I have one of these. And honestly, I'm at the point now where I recognize, like you said, it can go like this. But like those are my two biggest things. Like I have like, okay, because obviously, right, like it's not like you can just straight jump into wife, family. Like there has to be a lot of the effort, but almost all the effort right now is going into, the conquer, the business, the whatever, build, right? Just build overall. But then just like you said, man, like whether it's now or later, like talking about intuition, like I operate honestly, shit, I don't know if I had to put it percent out, maybe like major decisions and moves in the way I live my life is probably like 80 or 90% intuition based. And so actually it's kind of cool, and I'm certainly like eager for it. For whatever reason, this year I have a solid feeling like, hey, I think maybe a longer term relationship is something that will probably happen this year. So who knows? Obviously, it's not happening right now, but it's kind of funny that we talk about this too, because every time I put like ask me a question in my story, I get like at least one who's like, "Oh, are you currently seeing anyone?" Or and that'll be like some like a dumbass friend just messing or something. or it'll be like, hey, are you single? Right? Like something like that. And it's like, I haven't answered that one yet. So I guess I'll answer here, like currently open, but also building, whatever you want to say. But yeah, man, definitely just a shit ton of alignment there too, it sounds like.
Yeah, no, that's funny. I think unfortunately you're not going to be advertising to a very female audience here.
Yeah. I had a feeling that was there, but guys, tell your friends, tell your girlfriends.
Yeah, no. I joke about like it is fun, and I think that it almost allows like an interesting freedom too, because like there are discussions that I think are, I don't know, like the masculine and feminine are inherently different, and I think like acknowledging the difference but equally beautiful and beautifully different kind of thing is really important. And I've had some female guests on the podcast now. I'm like reaching out to a bunch more because I think that having that dialogue is super important. It teaches me a lot about the world, like the female mind, but having like the discussion about it amongst men, like will give you the most clarity because like they're playing from your side and your perspective. And I think it's super important. And I also think that, you know, kind of what you were touching on and what I've observed with my previous past relationships. And like, I'm sure you believe in like, you know, reciprocity and the mirror principle, and like you receive in a partner who you are, like it's a reflection, right? So every previous relationship that doesn't work, if you don't play the victim and don't play the blame game, it was like, it's ultimately 100% your fault. You can't attract a red flag if you don't have it.
Yeah.
And there's so much to learn from it. And so now it's like, I think for me, the reason, kind of an underlying reason, to not get granular at the differences between each one, but like an underlying reason that like I didn't attract this like ideal feminine partner that once is ready to be like led gracefully in a direction that like I'm the leader of the family and all these things I have as an aspiration, is because I didn't have the direction. Like there was no clarity. Like I had the ambition. Like I've always felt like that kind of like the Alexander, like no one can defeat me in battle until I die kind of thing. And that's like a, you know, maybe self-deluded, like egotistical thing to have, but like the ambition is there, but the direction, like how it was going to actualize, like being able to tell somebody like, this is where we're going, would you like to join? That wasn't clear until now. Like I very much feel like it's crystallizing day by day. And so that moment and that kind of frame switch is going to allow, and similar in your life, that person to walk in and be like, I get it. Like I not only see the ambition and I'm excited about all these things and attracted to like X, Y, and Z aspect, but it's like I can step into the frame and into the journey and be led in kind of like this massive direction. And I think you touched on that, and Arlen's talking a lot about this recently, where like choosing the right person, it's like an accelerator as opposed to this detractory force, because you're kind of talking about how in your mind and in my mind as well, like they're potentially opposed because there's so many hours in the day. You want to apply a ton of them to the care that your partner deserves, but it's also like, I need to be building and like, I feel called for my purpose. But like, that is kind of the, you know, the inherent, and I'm sure you've read like David Deda's Way of the Superior Man, like understanding what even is the purpose of masculine and feminine energy. Like we have as men more of that masculine energy. And so we needed to direct it somewhere. Like it's supposed to go out into the world to be a penetrative force, to overachieve, overcome all of these things. But without a direction, it's like, what do you just like scream at a TV for the sports game on the weekend? Like you need something to direct it at. And like we are fortunate to be positioned at a very young age comparative to many people that we're starting to see what that is, like where to aim all that energy and kind of like start battling towards. And I think that's just going to allow the doors to open for that partner that is on that similar energy level to kind of step in.
And I think that's really bottom line. Just that ending is part of the reason I'm totally okay with it. And I guess the funny note is the only thing that really ever makes me feel like, ah, shit, like maybe I do, is because I have my mom. I don't know if you get this or not, but my mom's in my ear like, hey, Will, is there, you meet anyone lately? Is anybody coming home to see us? Right. And she's just, you know, just in my ear like that. But like you said, like I'm great. Like I couldn't really be better. Like I'm just incredibly fulfilled. I feel exceptional. I don't stress about it because I know that everything I'm doing right now in all areas is preparing for that equivalent woman, like you said. And so as I only get better, I trust and believe she too is either, getting better, or just I have to maybe work myself up to there, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Right.
I also would call that out though. It's an important limiting belief that I've recently start to recontextualize for myself, is that you don't like reach a stage, and I'm sure you're consciously aware of this, but like it's important to also know that like you don't fix all the issues so that you're the person that like gets
Right.
to the relationship.
Grow and develop and
And
continue.
I've looked into like a lot of the actual like relational psychology stuff. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Dr. Nicole LaPlera, but she's like the holistic psych on IG and Twitter. Amazing work.
Oh yeah, okay. Actually, I am familiar. I knew the IG. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing stuff. And she talks about, attachment styles, all these things. And the important thing to strive for is what's called like interdependence. So like
Mhm.
codependence, obviously nobody wants that, where it's like one person is very dependent, like they need the other person to exist. Hyper independence would be, I don't need a partner. In fact, I'm averse to true vulnerability, and that could be from either party or one or the other. But interdependence is like I'm an incomplete person, or like I haven't, worked through all of my relational issues necessarily, but I'm going to heal them in this relationship. And I think that was a big realization for me, is that like I'm trying to do all this work to heal, the stuff that was passed to me, like generational trauma, quote unquote, like relational issues, whatever I bring to the table, right? But there are actually things that I won't be able to fix outside of the context of a relationship, because they only actually show themselves in the presence of a relationship, because there's like that like emotional depth and testing point. So preparing for somebody and trying to seek out a partner that is on that wavelength and is ready to do, as Nicole puts it, like the work with you. So that's kind of like an exciting prospect, and it also helps you break that limiting belief that like I have to wait till I'm at whatever. And for like, I think young men, it's like we want to be providers, we want to be protectors, so maybe there's like limiting beliefs around like I need to make X amount of money or have X amount saved, and there's all
Right.
kinds of like layers to it. But I would say that like the important thing is that you're already at like such a high level of self-awareness, and that part, some person will be able to like actually recognize it. The important part is just knowing when it's time for you to set that intention, which is like the hard call to make. But I think, yeah, the intuition will tell you, you'll know.
Yeah. Oh yeah, most definitely.
Well, I mean, we could go on and on and on in any kind of direction, but I think it's worth getting into some of these questions, because a few of them are deeper and open-ended. So I kind of like ordered these in like a surface to like depth level. We'll do the opener question. This is from Holly. She said, where do you see yourself in 5 weeks, 5 months, and 5 years?
Interesting. Yeah, so for 5 weeks, what is that, like a month and a half, maybe something?
Basically, yeah, midsummer.
Yeah, so for this one, it's kind of interesting. It's doing much the same as what I am. I know from a brand standpoint, like this month I'm back home in Ohio to see the family, but also to um I mean, I grew up in a town of like 15,000 people, so there's not a lot going on here, to be honest. So, some projects and things of the work where I'll be talking like this and sharing a lot more on my personal. So that will they be there? As far as location goes, somewhere in Europe, definitely within the Mediterranean. So whether that's Italy, or Spain, or maybe even Croatia. Would be as far as location goes. So I'll be in Europe, or comma right now. Plan is to be in Europe. Who knows what might change? So that's for 5 weeks. 5 months puts us in, what is it right now? It's five, so that'd be October, I think. As far as location goes, plan is once again right now to be in South America. Um, Most likely based in Medellin. I lived there for like around 2 months earlier this year. Was a big fan. Actually, kind of huge realization, and I guess dependent on conditions, etc. But to me, it made no sense as to why I should really live in Florida when I can get exactly what I want as far as like living with great friends and these absolute killers that we all live together and I bring together. But also, why would I live in somewhere like Florida, which is also a great environment and whatnot, when I can live in somewhere like Medellin, Colombia, when I can get a much, much higher quality of life at the same cost. So that's addressing that as far as like living and location. And then from within Medellin, travel to, whether that be like Central America or other parts of South America. And then as far as doing what there, really for most of this and due in part to congruency would be just continuing to build and do more of the same at higher levels too. So more clientele in terms of congruency, continuing to build and develop tribe in the community there, traveling at bigger scales, and then especially essentially part of my focus this year is traveling at a much higher frequency than I will in the future, because I am building relationships and knowledge and understanding in terms of a bunch of different locations to where, I'll bring people out on trips and experiences. So doing that, definitely at that time in Colombia and other places in South America. And then was it just 5 years next?
Yeah.
So this is certainly something that's really interesting, and I'm guessing probably on all of these we could go a bit deeper, but I'm just going to touch on this. I've definitely like think about things in terms of like the future, and that's definitely more near than far future. But 5 years is way different than next year. So right at one point, it's who knows what the world will be like in 5 years, really, especially for probably guys like you and I, or a lot of the people in the space where we study like, okay, maybe like macroeconomic events or even global movements, etc. Right, where it's like, oh, who knows if there's going to be like a CBDC, central bank, right, like all kinds of bullshit like that. But bottom line, the vision and plan for like 5 years in advance is, I would say by that point, so I would be 29, almost 30 there. In terms of family and relationships, I would generally be hard pressed to think I wouldn't have a wife. So wife, and with what the ambition and desire and plan, wife and children. So family, would, to go back a little bit to the whole travel thing. Essentially I'm traveling more in terms of like 1 month or so at a time, because one of my overarching purposes for traveling at that frequency this year is to establish the 3 or 4 locations that I will rotate between, with maybe some smaller exploration in there. So by that time would also be owning the villas or generally places I'm staying in those locations. I'd like to move my family to a main one. So whatever that consists of, and just essentially grow, through brand and through different business and projects, grow that exponentially, right? Because the more you impact, the better in terms of impact and also, who I'm working with. I want to bring, guys like you and other great friends I have, and people I know working, at higher scales, but also bring those people with me. We're, doing business together in different forms, whatever that may be. But generally what I tell people, most of like, you and I discussed before we even started this, was working within the niche of essentially like community, travel, and experience. Right now, specifically, more focused within the realm of online business and those in the whole, like, our side of the internet and business in the world. Certainly not against holding anyone back or limiting that. But continue to build and spread awareness of what I believe is going to greatly improve the world and people in it, and make it a continually better place. And really, if you want to put things in terms of like holy war or spiritual war, fight and benefit the good side.
Yeah, I
So
love
yeah,
that. And I'm glad that you kind of touched, and I kind of probably predicted it as well, that like the important thing I think when doing these future projections, and like once you start to really, really study the like the art of visualization, manifestation, like these wisdom traditions, you start to realize that you're tapping into a power that is like kind of imperceptibly larger than yourself. And so trying to define ahead of time the how and obsessing over the how will limit the capacity of the universe to give you a better opportunity than you can perceive in the present moment.
right.
And I think that's even like relationship, perfect example. If you get too granular about who you're looking for, and like you're only limited to like, she has to be 5'5", she has to have this hair color, she has to have this eye color, she has to be from this town, like you are cutting off the unbelievably amazing person that could have surprised you beyond all belief. And I think that that applies to all arenas, where I kind of reject the notion of like the 5-year plan. I think a lot of people our age do. I think a lot of people our age do because they don't really have the forethought to like think or know
They
where
don't
they're
even know
going.
the 3 month, right? Yeah.
Yeah. But I think that the 5-year plan, like it's all about setting, yeah, like what is the high level intention of where you want to be? Where do you want to be as a person? Like piece wise, what do you want maybe like an individual day in 5 years to look like?
Yeah.
Rather
And
than
actually, sorry to interrupt, but if
go
I
for
can
it.
even revisit that, like to touch within the community and maybe give people a better idea. And this is actually something I wanted to bring up earlier. I recommend anybody who hasn't to read The Fountainhead first.
Yes, dude.
Ayn Rand. I tell a lot of people read that one first because it's a great example and understanding for those who know it and need it on how to live life. And then second is Atlas Shrugged, also by Ayn Rand, on the approach and the maybe the results and action side of things, perhaps. So if you've read Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged, there's a part in there that they call Atlantis, where essentially it's a community of some of the greatest entrepreneurs and minds of the time, in a number of different ways, and something that would be like I would say probably within that 5-year scope would be building or working within a community similar to that, where it's a people who know this is the way we want to live, and diving in there like explanation wise probably going to be a bit longer than we want. So we'll just say that building the community, working within it, and establishing that. So like for within that scope of like having these different areas across the world, possibly that community you would interact and live and travel with one another that way. Like I know that's something I want to do is, have essentially a community where it's all these different people who, we're teaching each other's kids different lessons, etc., and moving and traveling in the ways that we know are best to prepare for the future, etc. Whatever you want to say. But yeah, thanks for letting me revisit that for a second.
Of course, yeah. We're gonna have to talk after we finish this. I have some interesting things to share with you
Yeah.
on that exact aspect. But yes, I also envisage a brighter tomorrow. I'm extremely long on the human spirit. I reject the doom pill, and we haven't really talked about that. It's too kind of late in this episode. We'll probably begets a part 2, but kind of this story arc of like awakening and getting into like the dark night of the soul, as the spiritual community puts it. But there's the dark night of the red pill, basically, in any arena of life, where like you learn so much about a thing that it's like, holy shit, I'm helpless. The elites have all the control. Like it's very scary. But I've gotten past that, and I'm now in like the white pill, believe in the power of positivity, God, all this energy.
And to interject on that, one of the you might have heard, I don't know if he said it since, but I actually met Sobra back in November and kind of asked him a similar question. And he had this great comment where really you haven't helped yourself whatsoever and you haven't changed for the better if all you did was exchange CNN and Fox News for global elite and whatever else. So that was just something that for me was a great reframe for anybody else, thinking about that or maybe even going.
No, I think that's a good point to interject on. I think that is a different phraseology of exactly kind of my worldview and philosophy and why will live and die on the hill of like the internal world is that like the truth is all of those things exist as much as you allow them into your world. So the same way that like, most people our age could be like, yeah, okay, mainstream media is controlled. I'll turn it off. But like you get into the internet and like Twitter's now your internet source for news, but then that can get really scary. And the truth is fear is always the control mechanism, but where does fear exist? It's only inside of you. So if you just don't even allow it to energetically touch you, like just reject that it even exists, only interact with the things that are real. And those are the only things that are real. And that gets into like a lot of like particle physics and like really crazy shit that like we won't go into here, but like, yeah, anyway, we are diverging, but certainly an important point to touch on, I think, in that kind of future projection, like where do you see yourself in the future? I'll try to like quickly take my answers for those for like 5 weeks. For this summer, I'm going to be back with my family. There's some stuff like moving my grandma out of her previous house because like her husband passed. My brother's graduating. He's engaged now, which is insane. Younger brother, by the way.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So like kind of a mind altering thing to happen. And he's preparing to move into a house. So I'm going to like help him and his fiance prep that. So home, family for the next 5 weeks. And then at the end of that 5 weeks, prepping for what will be my next location. Again, that is one of those where I feel kind of intuitively it's going to be someplace like vital coastline, likely domestic, but potentially abroad. But I'm letting the place define itself over time and just kind of holding the intention of like the life that I want to be living at that time. And then 5 months, kind of very similar to that as well. And then 5 years, yeah, like really, really big visions. We'll talk off air a little bit about that. But I want to long-term leverage my kind of, I don't know if on Twitter you've seen it, kind of like your unfair advantage, like lean into the things that were given to you as the tool that makes you like wildly different. We talked before this started about the niche of one. And I think that for whatever reason, and there's a bunch of variables that went into it, whether it was like reading a ton as a kid, being raised by 2 lawyers, like articulation, verbally and written, is something that I was given. And I'm continuing to like work on that craft. And so I want to be someone who is like actually facing the world and sharing these thoughts that we're talking about and helping people overcome at scale, whether that's talking at conferences, writing books, but being present in the public eye, not for vanity, but to help people at scale that I could never individually, with coaching and whatever. Like that offer is going to have to change over time because my bandwidth is limited. But I really want to measurably change the world and be an example, including kind of this community project that we'll talk about, but show people that there is a chance for a brighter tomorrow if you believe it to be so. And you have to master your internal world, and it becomes real as soon as you allow it to be, and kind of get the collective consciousness out of states of fear, states of limiting belief, because it's transformed my life in a real way, and I want to get as many people there as possible.
Yeah.
We'll probably won't get to the rest of these questions in this episode. We'll do a part 2. I'll choose one from this list for the closer, or the previous to the closers, and then we'll circle back. So if anyone is listening and they're like, oh, my question didn't get answered, we have it written down, or I have it written down, and we'll do it as a part 2. This can be the hook for the next episode, but we want to give the respect to some of these deeper questions that they deserve, and explore them at the depth that our linear thinking minds tend to go into. So let's say, let's do this one. This is from Eli. He said, "What are your best strategies for connecting with a higher power?"
Yeah. All right there. So this actually, we might even do multiple, because I feel like this one you can answer pretty succinctly and just cover the bases because the answer is found through the action. So great question. By all means, of course, great question. Uh, Really best ways and modalities to do it, I would say, or I could change my answer in, a minute or so, who knows? But I think three main things. So it's going to be um, meditation, meditation and prayer together, time in nature, aka creation, and time spent in love, meaning in loving environments with others you love, other strong people, environments, etc. Even like in love with action. So like, right, like, people who like, if your greatest thing is playing golf and like you get so much peace and freedom from that, then honestly, I say that's a way to connect. And so to zoom in there, I view prayer and meditation almost as just two different sides of the same coin, where I consider prayer the discussion or talking and asking, and the meditation to be the listening. But also the meditation has the added benefit too of just the connecting, or as in like in a sense of like connecting to God or the source or whatever language you want to use there. And is also, meditation to be used greatly, or like I said, all these other activities that I guess I'll touch on in a second to clear the mind in order to better connect. Number two, as far as spending time in nature and in creation, there is really like the important part is the natural world and the disconnect from the unnatural or the artificial. So that's like doing things like grounding or walking in nature, swimming in the ocean, depending on where you are, right? Like basically getting in nature, and specifically where you're a bit more like really what I would say best is going to be like as detached as possible. So, that's like, right, like one of the most esoteric and good things for connecting that I've done is literally like climbing a mountain. I climbed a volcano in Bali last year. A guy named Jan Amstutz climbed a mountain in Sequoia National Park. That's like one of the most OG. And then like cell phones don't work, etc. You're living there, you're taking it all in, and like not to mention like meditating at the peak and stuff like that. Like that's just going to multiply. But even just as simple as like going outside, walking barefoot in the grass, without your phone and doing a little bit of something like that. And then number three, time spent in love and around those you love is going to be good, where essentially you're in that flow state or the zone of like, whether that's being really comfortable playing games with your family or in discussion with your loved ones, or you're playing basketball and going hard or in a workout or something like that. Or, I mean, shit, we have shower thoughts for a reason. Like if a shower is a place where you find peace, and you're relaxing and actively like emptying your mind and end up being, a receptive vessel, I guess, in that way, like that's a great place too. But yeah, I would honestly, that's, you could go in on the minutia of all of those, but I think that covers it really.
Yeah, I think to not rehash and to kind of maybe summarize, I think the important thing for anyone looking to connect to God or source in the simplest way is like true presence. I think all of your things talked about just being totally in it, and you can't be it when you're in a consumptive state. Social media, listening to a podcast, listening to another person, or trying to like formulate responses to another person. So my answers are, solitude, which I think is important. Like you have to isolate yourself. Gratitude practices, because they kind of bring this kind of state of abundance. and then a state of creation where you're actually just genuinely outputting. And a lot of people don't have that outlet. If they're not a creator, they don't put content out. But I would challenge people to find some way to do that. Like if you're not an artist, if you're not a writer, like sit down and try to write a poem, sit down and try to draw something. Something in my program that's like really unique is I call it the Da Vinci project, but you actually have to make something with your hands, whether it's a drawing, a painting, or something physical like a carving or a desk lamp or whatever it is. But over the 12 weeks, you actually make something from your mind into reality, and you see yourself as this kind of reality creator live. So the act of creation, whatever that is for you, is a great way, because like you said, you're turning yourself, or you're witnessing yourself be that conduit for God and source, because those things are going through you and out into the world now in this actualized item that is physical.
Great.
But yeah, the underlying, go ahead.
I was just saying that was gas. Yeah, I love that. Doing, like you said, the Da Vinci, what was it, the Da Vinci project or Da Vinci work? I love that. Yeah, so good.
Yeah, no, I just think it's important to see yourself as a creator. And a lot of people, unless you're in a space that facilitates it, you have to sit down and work in the discipline of it, kind of recontextualize yourself. And the easiest way to do that is by, like you said, it's in the action. So yeah, we could go on and on about that, but the biggest thing, the easiest ways are going to be, you got to get alone and you got to get away from inputs. So carve out quiet times. Like there was something very spiritual about mornings and evenings, because it's like portals are opening. We don't have to go into like that crazy stuff, but on a very objective level, the world is quiet in the morning and the world is quiet at night because most people are going to bed and waking up. So if you want quiet time to meditate and true stillness, wake up a little bit extra early before your day starts, or stay up really, really late into the night until everybody goes to bed, whatever floats your boat and fits your schedule. Those are times where you're going to be able to tap into that peace most effectively, in my opinion. And there are layers to it that you can get into later about those kind of consciousness portals opening and closing. But yeah, I think look for that isolation in maybe those times of day. Ideally connect it with nature, because again, you're starting to witness kind of the unity of creation and something that is outside of yourself, but extremely powerful. And then guess and check, and don't expect an angel to come down and speak to you the first time you try. I think I went on a 5-day silent retreat for my birthday this year, looking to see what kind of challenge it would bring. And even on a conscious level, I knew nothing like that was going to happen. But on an unconscious level, I even observed in myself a little bit of that expectation, like I wanted to hear the voice of God, something like that. But it's not really going to come to you necessarily. Sometimes it will be that level of clarity and gravity, but don't expect like your first time sitting down to meditate to be like entering another dimension.
Yeah.
It's going to be hard.
I would say,
it's going to be running all these things.
Yeah, to tack on, the presence literally just covers, you can say like the more time in presence, honestly, the more time you are probably closer to God. So being present as much as possible, I would say, is always the goal. But specifically within that too, as you advance more and more, like I recommend, some of the guys, that I work with too, is to actually meditate when you have the most shit, either mentally or just physically going on, because when it can be even more important to, be present and find God there. But just to tack that on quickly.
Yeah, no, that's good. And then my final note is another strategy for me. Training has become equally spiritual as it is physical, because you're kind of circumventing the mind by getting really, really in your body. It is hard to be anxious about the things going on tomorrow when you're sitting under a couple 100 pounds of a bench press or a squat, or sprinting at full effort up a hill. So do something physically hard and you will be nowhere but doing that thing. It forces you to breathe heavily. Now, you're not going to maybe get premonitions about X, Y, and Z, but the trickle-down effects of exercise are very important, not just physically, but spiritually. So connecting to the higher power, I think, you gotta game the system a little bit and trick the monkey physical body into really clicking into that higher power.
Yeah.
And then similarly, Logan asked another question, which is like the best way to tap into different spiritual vibrations, which I think we were kind of alluding to in that. And the second part of his question is the best way to explain that you are God / can tap into those higher vibrations. I think it's like the Christ in you. And obviously your Christian perspective is going to be in language different, but like in the Bible, it says like made in the image of God, right?
And that's what I was going to say. Like, I don't know, like, and yeah, like we've already talked about plenty of times, like try to explain it in different ways. I think honestly, this one can be the easiest. The easiest approach is maybe to tackle it from the Christian side of things. Is like you said, made in the image of God, but also like, really, if you want to use a different name for God within us, right? It's like the Holy Spirit, which in Christian doctrine pretty much is when Jesus died, like, and everything else, like that was where everyone got the Holy Spirit there. And there's so many different parts of the body, the Bible, where you can address we, because of that Holy Spirit, like we are literally gods. And in that sense, I would say, and I'm not going to go like all the way in depth there, is like, the difference between us as gods and like big G God, right? But in that same concept, like Eckhart Tolle also says things like, right, like, okay, like the state of godliness is like pure presence. You can approach it from that angle too. But like that would be probably the way that I would tend to explain it the most. Any other way would be like addressing the fact of what you'd have to, like, I would say, require a bit more time to talk about, but basically it would be addressing the actual power of the mind and what humanity is actually capable of, which probably is a lot of like wading through different waters, just like getting into those consciousness portals and things like that. Definitely getting into the esoteric world a bit. But right, you can, if you want to, like, I would challenge maybe if the Christian explanation or anything like that doesn't work for you, to look up, like, you can just go on YouTube and look up like actually superhuman things. Like, I'm sure there's some clickbaity titles as far as like, okay, like this monk. I just watched a video about this where it was like a Shaolin monk was doing like death-defying acts, or literally like was causing, through like intense focus and concentration, like burned a hole in a piece of paper of shit like that. Or like, if you study the most successful humans ever, oftentimes they will call themselves gods. Like Egyptian pharaohs were supposed to be gods, or like Alexander the Great, for example, one of the greatest conquerors ever, viewed himself as a god. I think same thing with Genghis Khan, right? Like there's a lot of that where it would be, that might not be helpful for literally processing it, but just like you have placebo in medicine, there's the placebo in that as well, where you could probably get much enhanced effects just from proclaiming it or believing it.
Yeah, we won't open that up because that could be maybe where we start off for the next podcast, because I love that world, and like the power of the mind must not be understated. But I'm glad that you talked about Eckhart Tolle, because I think he has a good contextualization, which is, and this is speaking kind of directly to Logan, by proxy, anyone else that is also trying to articulate, maybe it's members of family, other people that are talking to, the things that they're starting to discover. The really important thing, and it's why I harp so much on speaking and writing and words, is you have to divorce the dogmatic ideological tie to the words. And when you're trying to articulate it to somebody, you have to be sensitive to who you're talking to and what words work for them. So like, I love the word God, like, because it's like that. So that's what I'll typically say, but I'll always be like, or universe or source or whatever.
To just pause on this for a second, actually, that's really, really helpful, because I tend most not to say God, actually. And speaking like this, I will, and I do, but when I talk to God myself, I use Yahweh, which is actually in Hebrew means I think, God within us. And so that's a really interesting note. And like, if you go back into like different Hebrew and like originally like, you know, Jewish and names was like Adonai, Yahweh, Emmanuel, etc. Like there's a names for God. Yeah, exactly. A lot. Yeah. Like in outside. So yeah, just to touch on that, like that's what I use Yahweh personally, which if you want to maybe dive into that, that would be a good area of study for you too. But to go back, so
no. Though, like I think it's all extremely linked, and like the etymology and epistemology matters a lot because what you are starting to realize, and me and like Logan's somebody like in my community that I talk to all the time, so it's why he asked. But like the what you start to discover is that the truth with a capital T or God with the big G, it's the same across all of these different like dogmas, religious schools, whatever. Like, and the reason you can be affirmed as opposed to disappointed by that truth is that like all of these different people groups kept kind of finding it and then redescribing it in ways that worked for the time. And like right now we live in the like the modern West, so science is our God. Like it is brought up, like the placebo, what is now called placebo used to be called miracles and acts of God, but that is no longer in the collective consciousness. People don't magically heal themselves. We just take their data set out of the study because it's the placebo effect. But that's the power of the mind. That's the power of God acting in the moment. Anyway, we're definitely this is important. I would love to like enter into the next episode with that kind of thing. So we're gonna curtail this because I need to get to my closer questions, and I think expecting people to drag too far into this would be a lot. Like I love these kind of conversations, and I hope people have soldiered on to the 2 hour mark.
Yeah, big appreciation to everyone listening.
Yeah, no, I always give shouts to like the soldiers that make it to like the 2 hour, 3 hour mark. It's like the true, there's so much like value in these kind of conversations. So, you know, the real ones are making it this far. So big shouts, and you guys are going to get all the really good value because we get to the Q&A at the end. And all right, so here are my closer questions I ask every guest. I know that we haven't totally touched on, but they are, you know, somewhat related. My project, I work with men specifically. I think it's important that in our world we have strong men. You've kind of echoed that. A lot of underlying the whole discussion has been like becoming, you and I, men that we are proud of and then can lead and build amazing things for the world. So in your eyes, what defines being a man?
Yeah. So bottom line, I would say capability, to be honest. And that's to, I'm going to go back to my personal mantra. A man should be an artist, a warrior, and a philosopher. And like, if you break those down, they're definitely going to cover what I'm going to say now. But like, just to list out areas of capability, it's going to be protect, serve, lead, communicate, teach, and and conquer slash produce slash build. That's really what I would say there. And capable means proficient as well. And I would encourage everyone to pursue greatness and as much as they can. Right. Like, so for me, example, right. I am definitely intense as a person, but I'm not going to discourage anyone else from not being intense. Like, you should be intense and go to the extreme route. But like, for example, in terms of being a warrior and fighting, I don't want to just be able to defend myself or my family from the average man. In terms of like hand-to-hand combat or like putting into like kickboxing or Muay Thai or MMA, right? Like, I want to be able to defend my family from the black belts, not just the average, right? And apply that across the board, right? You should be proficient in many things. And if you want to go to the, how should I say, the other side of it, it's where there's the whole quote where, you should be smart and strong. Because what's the original quote? It's where our thinking will be done by those who are weak, and our will be fought by those who are, just dumb or whatever. I just totally paraphrased and misquoted that, but I'm guessing, we can either look that up and put that in or something. But that was always the thing. Like, I grew up definitely like realizing, yeah, I'm nerdy in a lot of ways. But also, not, and I wasn't definitely thinking in this pattern now, but like, you need to be smart and strong to be the most capable. But I just wanted to be, I guess, strong or athletic because it was cool, which ended up working out, and I think is partially a good thing to reinforce. But yeah, definitely covered that a little bit of a stringent way, but yeah.
No, I like that answer. And yeah, I mean, it brings the conversation full circle, right? Like warrior, poet, philosopher, king, scholar, athlete. You need to be a balanced man in the context of the business I'm building, a Renaissance man, a Vitruvian man. The slogan or motto of my company is like, be the Renaissance, like embody the movement you would like to see, like live the rebirth that you want to see in the world. So I love that. And then the second question of 3, which is, if you could go back to a younger version of yourself, maybe that version of yourself where you're deep in the pits of depression, maybe even younger, what would that one, and tell him one thing, what would that one thing be?
Honestly, so I'm not going to go back to the depression or like, dark night of the soul type areas. I'm going back to when I first started playing basketball, and actually like uh even around like an early high school me. And because I saw the world through and like got into all of this through basketball and the personal development and the ways of thinking and the self-awareness. Um it would be to not care what others thought more, and reinforce that with the fact um, that even though someone might be older or in a position of authority or something like that, right? That doesn't mean they know what's best, or, and this, I guess you could take 100 different negative ways, what's best for you, or even they don't know. More of what I mean is what you can do. So like applying this personally, I know this because I know myself, which is probably getting deeper into this than we need to. I know by saying this, I'm going to change my thinking processes from that time way earlier, which would overall accelerate everything else in life. Specifically, like what I'm referring to is like, there was one moment in like junior or senior year where I trained a whole summer of a mid-range jump shot, and became pretty lethal at it, right? But literally, because I was such a rule follower or perfectionist or whatever, model student or athlete or whatever you want to say, because my coach said he didn't want me shooting and taking any of those shots, I never shot them. And even though it was probably just, I mean, in basketball terms, I was pretty good at shooting overall, but was something I put huge work into and I know would have been very effective. I really just shouldn't have listened there. And there's so many other examples. So it's not like, oh, fuck everybody else, do what you want. It's just having that understanding was one of the best thinking patterns, I guess, I updated in my software, you could say.
Yeah, I love that. The idea of like, your life is yours to live. You like, don't be some like caricature or fit into a box somebody else is telling you, because it's like the Jim Carrey thing. He's giving the commencement at whatever university he's talking about his father, and he's like, my dad failed at living somebody else's life. He failed at living somebody else's life, meaning you can fail at doing something you don't want to try or being a person you don't want to be. So why not try to be yourself? And it comes with that unabashed, fuck it, I'm going to be me, and I don't need to think on the thoughts of what other people think. And especially that goes into the full circle again with the intuition thing, trusting deeply your sense of self. And that's a skill to curate over time, certainly. And the earlier you can start it, the better. And then finally, the last question is, I'm a big quote guy, big words guy, and I think you are similar in that sense. So I'm curious, what is one quote that's always stuck with you or that you try to live by?
I'm going to break your rule and I'm going to do two.
Not the first to do it.
Yeah. Okay, good. Because I think they encapsulate one another. And I have you've heard me say the man should be a warrior, artist, and philosopher. That's one of my other personal mantras. So like, I'll say one mantra and one quote. Probably the mantra that I've had oh shit, man, I see it now. I want to do another mantra. But we'll just do this one. One of my longest held mantras is Sic Parvis Magna. I actually got it from a video game, but it's originally from Sir Francis Drake. Video game was Uncharted for anybody who played. But it's Sic Parvis Magna, which means greatness from small beginnings. And I never even got into this part, I guess, but like I lived in and out of the hospital till I was 5, pretty much. I'm deaf in one ear. I have one kidney that works amongst a myriad of other things that I've dealt with. And obviously, you heard some of the other shit that I've gone through. So your small beginning could be in any area that has, no determination on what you can do. So greatness is always the pursuit and always what should become. So that's the mantra. And then coincidentally, also from the same video game, it's by T.E. Lawrence, otherwise known as Lawrence of Arabia. It's the dreamers of the day are dangerous men, for they act their dreams with open eyes to make them possible. So that is one of my personal anchors and favorite quotes, is because I'm a dreamer of the day and I know I'm going to dream my, see, now I can't recall what the quote was, pull it out of there, but I'm going to, live my dreams with open eyes and be a dreamer of the day. So I would encourage all of you to, live by Sic Parvis Magna and be dreamers of the day.
I love it. I can't think of a more poetic way to end it. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I hope that you and I were not too circuitous and tangential with our thinking and speaking, so that the audience could stay with us. I know that people appreciate us for who we are, and I'm grateful for anyone that has come from Will's captive audience to hear. I hope that you found this valuable. I know that Will shared a ton of stuff, and I'm appreciative of you, of course, for being so vulnerable and spending this time with me and sharing this space with me. I hope that you also found it enriching. Where can the people find you, and what are you working on that you're excited about?
Yeah, so definitely area most easily to be found is Instagram at will.coomer, at WILL.COOMER is going to be best. So reach out to me, send me a DM on Instagram, whatever. I seriously really care about helping others, just like we've talked about, and want to do everything I can. So definitely reach out there on Instagram. And then as far as what I'm excited about is further, like what we talked about, doing more of this, just you and I having another one of these, talking more, spreading more through my brand, and just continuing to build out some of these projects and travel to more places.
Love it, brother. Well, I'm excited to watch you grow alongside you now, share the journey a little bit, as I say, share the arena. It's been an honor. To those listening, if you're curious about hearing more of this, obviously you're hearing it on either YouTube, Apple Pods, or Spotify. Continue to follow along there for future episodes. If you want to follow myself, you can follow myself at ZDSCHENKEN on Instagram and Twitter. The podcast and the kind of the writings and works that I have for this are also at Vitruvian Gentleman on Instagram. Remember that your time and attention are your most valuable resources, so thank you for spending a little of them with myself and Will today. Memento Mori, and I'll catch you on the next episode of the Vitruvian Man podcast.
And if he fails, at least fails while daring greater, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat.